Good evening, Cleveland. Welcome to The Advocate. I'm your host, Nick Phillips, and tonight we're going to talk about some things that are really happening in Washington. And, of course, I'm in Cleveland. I'm not in Washington, but we have a couple of people who are in Washington right now. We have Congressman Todd Rokita from Indiana, and also Congressman David Joyce, our very own Congressman David Joyce from here in Ohio. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, good to be with you, Nick.
Thanks for having us, Nick.
Thank you. Congressman Rokita, one of the things I noticed that sort of drew my attention to your legislative initiatives and your activities are that, like me, you're also a pilot, and there's some things that are going on right now at the congressional level to attempt to change the way the FAA does business with general aviation pilots. Can you bring us up to date on what that's all about?
Yeah, happy to, Nick. And as I'm thinking about my constituents and all of America, really, including those in Cleveland who are enjoying the 4th of July weekend and what that really means, the celebration of freedom and liberty and really the birth of what the world has come to know as American exceptionalism. You can't help think about aviation, born also in the USA. And Ohio, I believe, although there's an argument with South Carolina, but we'll leave that.
On the air with us, so
we'll leave that alone right now. We have no Congress from South Carolina, but you get my point, Nick. I mean, this is part of our American exceptionalism. When part of our liberty and freedom is certainly manifested in a country that appreciates the gift that aviation is and the liberty and freedom that it brings. Having said that, it is one of the most, if not the most, regulated industries in the United States. And in fact, the part of the world that is enjoying the most growth in aviation, and specifically general aviation, is China. So it's against that backdrop that a lot of us in Congress, including not only myself but a good number of the folks in the Ohio delegation, come together and try to work on regulations that haven't been touched really since World War II. And one of those is what we call the third-class medical certificate. So a little bit of background. There are 3 types of medical certificates that aviators under current law have to obtain. There's the first-class medical, and that's for airline transport pilots. There's a second class, which is for commercial pilots, those who fly for money, but not necessarily airlines full of people. So those could be charter airplanes. Those could be guys that go around and do fire and rescue or other missions like that. Then there's the third-class medical, and that's for general aviation, those that do not fly for money, those that do not fly for hire, but just fly themselves or their family members or close friends around. And it's that third-class medical that has become so onerous that at a time when 6,000 pilots a year are leaving aviation, a significant reason for that is the idea that we have to jump through these hoops that no other part of our transportation has to jump through. Nowhere else in recreational aviation or recreational transportation does anyone have to go through any kind of the medical requirements that these aviators do, including the guy that you drove into work with, who was 2 feet away from you in the SUV in the next lane. You had no idea what his health record was, that he was driving 80 miles an hour right next to you. A lot less safe than an airplane, Nick. So that's what we're trying to revamp. There's no degradation to safety. It creates jobs because if you can start bringing these pilots back in, guess what? You start selling more airplane fuel, you start selling more airplane parts, you start selling more airplanes. And despite what the president wants to describe aviation as, this is not a bunch of rich people. It's not a bunch of fat cats in business jets. It's really... in a lot of ways, general aviation is the steel mill of the 21st century, and I know Cleveland. When I say that, Cleveland understands what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, well, Cleveland, as you know, Cleveland and Ohio has had quite a terrific history with regard to aviation. And here, as a matter of fact, Labor Day we're going to have the Cleveland National Air Races that started back in 1929 when aviation was in its heyday and technology was just continually blooming up through World War II and all the way to the present time. Well, one of the things, as we're talking about aviation, takes me back to the years like in the 1960s and 70s when we started getting larger and larger transports, and then the 747 came along, and then everything seemed to sort of freeze, and we've been watching this slow decline of maybe interest in general aviation. But you're correct that when you go to some of these airports and you see some of the pilots, they're average people who enjoy the recreation of flying, just like any other sport and hobby. And you mentioned that it is not any degradation to safety by doing away with the third-class medical certificate for general aviation private pilots. What would take its place?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that a pilot has a duty, and you know, common sense dictates that you don't fly with the flu, just like you don't, you know, go out driving around town when you're real sick. Same thing with pilots. So there's a self-inspection, first of all, and secondly, you know, if your health is good enough to pass a driver's test, so you can get a driver's license, we're saying the change in vehicle, especially one that is less likely to cause an accident because there's not as many, you're not as near proximity, is just as safe as having anything else or going through this onerous medical exam every 2 years that doesn't catch anything. You know, it doesn't. You know, if someone has a brain aneurysm, let's say, God forbid, in the cockpit, or a heart attack in the cockpit, unless there was a strong history of that, it wouldn't be known on a third-class medical anyway. So, and the bottom line, Nick, is that we have great data now to prove it because this is being done already. There's a category of license called the light sport aircraft. So it's some of our lightest aircraft. It's aircraft that are only flown during the day in very good weather, that kind of thing. There is no medical requirement for that, and that license has been type has been in effect for the last decade, and there have been no patterns or appreciable instances of regularity that regarding medical a medical condition causing an accident. So after 10 years of data, we think we should expand this to all pilots who fly not for hire, not other people around for money or for an airline, but who want to enjoy aviation again. And I'd love to have David Joyce chime in on it if you'd like.
Yeah, yes, Congressman Joyce. Any comments?
Well, I appreciate Todd when he brought it up because he realized how important it was for Ohio, and at the time when he was first starting to talk about the bill was about the time United started to back out of our Cleveland operations. And you know, the one thing you've noticed there is that we had those. You mentioned before, Nick, that we used to have the 747s, and we seem to go down to what I refer to as the cigar tubes, a lot smaller planes.
Right.
And then the trouble is now is there's so many pilots that are dropping out. A lot of times the cause for delays or the cancellation of the flight has been the fact that they can't have pilots who had been able to rest enough and meet all the requirements to be able to fly again, and so they have to cancel them. And you know, we should encourage more kids to get into flying, and I think it's important to have that. I mean, for those, I had a buddy from high school, and that was his thing, to chase his dream, and he went down to Embry-Riddle, and now he's the chief pilot for Parker Hannifin there in Cleveland. And, you know, those type of incentives, we want to incentivize more young people to get into flying because it's an important method of travel. It's a safe, very safe method of travel. And it's one of those things that when he showed me the bill, I was honored that he had asked me to be a co-sponsor along with him.
And these are high technology jobs,
right?
That come with aviation, general aviation or professional. So, all good stuff. Steve Shabbat, Bill Johnson, Jim Jordan, Bob Latta, Tim Ryan, Patrick T. Berry, and Brad Winstrup, all other folks, as you know, from Ohio that are co-sponsors of this bill.
Because Todd probably doesn't appreciate the fact that, like we do in Ohio, that the Wright brothers are actually from Dayton, and the University of Dayton is their name, the Flyers. They take it very seriously down in Dayton. I mean, there may be fighting words that it wasn't invented in the Ohio region. So
it's up for grabs. Let us know when I go to South Carolina, I get a different story. So.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you do. We're talking to two congressmen from Washington. We're talking to Congressman David Joyce and also Congressman Todd Rokita from Indiana, and we're talking about the Pilot Protection Act and revamping the FAA's regulations as it applies to general aviation pilots. So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back to talk to these two gentlemen. One of the things I like to talk about is stimulating interest in aviation, how this would help, and talk a little bit about the Civil Air Patrol. I know they take young people and get them really involved in aviation, and there are different programs like that I think we can still look to that this might stimulate. So we'll take a short break. We're going to be back after these words. You're listening to Nick Phillips on The Advocate here on WHK Cleveland. We'll be right back after these words. Don't go away. Welcome back, Cleveland. Nick Phillips with you with another segment of The Advocate. And we're pleased to have tonight with us Congressman Todd Rokita from Indiana and also Congressman David Joyce from right here in Ohio. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us again. And we're talking the Pilot Protection Act and general aviation, which actually plays a part of our economy, not only here in Ohio and in Indiana, but I think we can add that all up for what it does around the country as far as keeping our economy going, at least to its particular level of participation. With regard to groups like the Civil Air Patrol and other groups, I know they have a teen program that works with young men and women to get them interested in aviation. Are there some other things going on out there that we can look toward to get them involved in aviation easily?
Well, nothing worthwhile is easy, right? This is a learning adventure. It can start at all ages, and I think it starts with STEM education in a lot of respects. You'll see at the at Oshkosh, for example, this year, the big yearly air show that some of us, Nick, you know this, we call it Mecca for pilots. We go up there and spend a week celebrating that freedom and American exceptionalism that I alluded to earlier. But there'll be a program that I know of during that aviation celebration dedicated to STEM education. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. You heard me talk with Congressman Joyce in the last segment about how these are high technology jobs. Right? This is the steel mill of the 21st century. And yes, I want U.S. manufacturing to come back. In a lot of respects, it is, and we keep really cheerleading and doing more than cheerleading with respect to American manufacturing. But aviation could also be a significant player in our future, and it's going to be a significant player, as it's going to be a significant player around the world. David?
Well, Todd was just telling me a nice story, Nick, that you'd appreciate it, talking about there used to be an airport right downtown Chicago, and that he was 18 years old, and he would fly up there and do around the city, and we were talking about Burke Lakefront, and what a great way for somebody young to be involved, and as he said, it was very impressive for young ladies that he was giving the lift to up to Chicago and going around the city. But whatever it takes to get kids involved, because I do think these are it's certainly one of those areas that mass transportation that we need to continue to work with. We've been lucky here in D.C. because there's a former Clevelander, Nick Callio, who's head of the America for Airlines, which we hadn't organized before. And surprisingly, all the airlines worked independent of each other. But thanks to Nick, now they're all working in concert, as well as the shipping companies, UPS and FedEx, and that, to work towards a common goal of working on legislation that's important to all the industries together. And I know that some of the things they brought up for us was the fact that the increase in taxes on the airlines, they don't make their money on the short flights around the U.S. They make those really on the across the water hauls, the big ones across to the Europe and all. But the local ones, in just 20 some odd years, the taxes have gone up, have tripled from $22 to $61 or $62 per head on. And then every time we do that, we discourage more people from using this form of mass transportation. So it's important we get young people involved. It's important we make it cost effective and friendly, and it's something that we need to encourage more people to get involved with.
A question for either Congressman Rokita or Joyce. Does the bill, does it include a waiver of a medical for VFR and IFR pilots? That's visual flight rules or instrument pilots, or one or the other? How's that looking?
Well, I'll tell you what. The bill itself, the language as drafted, does not contain that same exception for instrument flight rules. And, Nick, I'll let you explain for your audience what the difference is. But that's not to say that the FAA won't include it or that the bill won't include it ultimately. We've been having, frankly, some very thorough and positive conversations with the FAA, including the leader of the FAA, Administrator Huerta. And I think you're going to see, because the positive pressure that this bill and its over 115 co-sponsors now are putting on the issue, that the FAA may act through rulemaking. And it's at that time that we can address, should this exemption, as it's expanded from the light sport now to the private pilot certificate, also be expanded in terms of what flight rules you're operating under, basically being good weather or in the clouds.
Flying in the clouds, and that's what instrument flying is. And
and
so
really, there shouldn't be
much pushback, or is it looking like this is starting to roll through and it's going to be a completed act here in the near future?
Well, what David and I have learned as newer members for sure is that there's pushback. You may not know it exists, but it's there. For sure. This is Washington, and so someone always has an interest in something, good or bad, with regard to these things. But that's why we come on a show like this, Nick, quite frankly, because we want we take our case right to the people in a lot of ways, and we want common sense to prevail, and we want these jobs, the safety, the economy to improve. We want it to happen right here in the United States, not China, like I said earlier in the program. So that's what this is about. And so.
One of the things, talking about how we have pilots that are all around us, the AOPA, which is the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, had a safety seminar up here in Cleveland last year, and it was promoted like normal promotions that they do with emails and so on. Over 200 people showed up here in Cleveland, the west side of Cleveland. So you wonder, where are all those pilots? But there are a lot of them around here, so this is a very interesting bill.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folks out there that that want to demagogue general aviation for their own purposes. And we're here to tell you, this is not millionaires and billionaires flying in big jets. And even if your company does have a jet, it's usually shared by many, many, many in the company. It generates revenue for the company. It helps maintain and increase jobs. And then there's legions, thousands of people that are just like your neighbor across the street, who instead of going fishing on the weekend or going golfing, you know what? They like to go to the airport. And there's nothing wrong, and there's everything American about that.
Very, very, very much so. Switching gears a little bit with some things in the news, we're watching what's going on in Iraq right now and how the United States is responding to that. And as Congressman in Washington, you're right close to the tip of the spear here as far as what goes on. Anything you can share with us as far as whether or not you think things are going to be calming down or just continually getting worse in Iraq?
Well, Nick, you make a good point, and I'm not sure that anybody can accurately predict where this is going. It's certainly something that needs to be monitored on a continuous basis. It's sad that the gains that were made a while back have been lost and continue to be lost by what's taking place over there. But you also notice that in listening to the morning shows while I was working out, that it seemed consistent in any polling that was out there that the American people don't want America getting involved in it again, that let the people there fight out their own battles, and it's common to what took place when we had an issue with Syria as well. But I think it's important that we continue to monitor the situation, because as long as we have Americans over there, we need to protect our interests, and certainly we can't let another attack on an embassy or an attack on Americans go without the appropriate punishment, and send a signal to the world that we're not going to take it.
I guess a real short question, and this being a Democratic Republican, we appreciate you guys going out and going through the hassle of being elected and then serving in Congress. The responsibility of the administration is to keep you guys briefed on what's going on. Do you feel you're getting sufficient briefings to know what's going on?
Well, in my 16, 18 months here now, I can tell you that the briefings that have taken place from this administration have not been as full and fruitful as I would hope they would be. because obviously when we're tasked with making determinations and authorizing money or getting involved in these type of things, I want to make sure that I have every single tidbit out there. And it seems that the administration plays their cards very close to the vest unless there's a problem, and then proceeds to drop it on us.
Then you hear, then you have to investigate. Well,
Correct.
Congressman David Joyce, thank you for being with us tonight. Congressman Todd Rokita, thank you. There's so much to talk about. Hope we can have you guys on again sometime.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. This is Todd from Indiana. Happy 4th of July to everybody.
Thank you so much. And David, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Nick.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be back after these words. And you're listening to Nick Phillips on The Advocate on WHK Cleveland. We'll be right back. Okay, very good. I'd like to have you guys on again, and I'd like to follow through with that. We'll notify the aviation community that we're talking about this tonight, and sort of get the listenership up for that on the 6th of July.
Well, that'd be fantastic. Todd obviously knows a lot about the industry. I didn't realize he started flying so young, but Bill Johnson.
Only to get girls, like I'm saying.
Well, I mentioned Civil Air Patrol, and that was kind of a neat group because it's co-ed. And what happens is that it's one of the few organizations you can get teenagers together and to do something like flying and everything. And a lot of relationships develop out of that.
Sure.
And that's why you need a lot of chaperones around a group like that.
All right, brother. Good to meet you over the phone, man. I'll see you later.
I'd like to see you. Probably see you at Oshkosh or somewhere. Come out to Cleveland for the air show, and maybe we'll see David out there.
Yeah, Joyce was telling me about it. That sounds like a deal, man.